Welcome to CityWorks, a co-production of the City University of New York School of Labor and Urban Studies and CUNY TV. I'm Laura Flanders. Each month here at CityWorks, we explore the challenges and lived experiences of working people on the job, at home, and in our communities. On today's episode, New York's labor movement and what appears to be a new wave of worker empowerment through legislation, organizing, direct action. It's all happening here in New York, the nation's labor capital. New York has seen a torrent of worker activism and solidarity of late. We've covered a lot of it here. Last year, more than 70,000 striking workers in New York City hit the streets demanding fair contracts, improved working conditions, protections against unregulated tech, and a voice at work in all manner of fields, including healthcare, entertainment, media, retail, manufacturing, and education. All of this with a lot of public support. Today, public opinion surrounding organized labor is more positive than it's been in decades. And yet, that enthusiasm has not always translated into overall gains in union membership. In New York, the numbers continue to be higher than the rest of the nation. New York's unionization rate is double the U.S. average. But those numbers here in New York haven't risen in decades. With us today to talk about New York labor, organized and not, are two of the city's most distinguished leaders in labor and politics. New York City Council member Carmen De La Rosa, chair of the council's Civil Service and Labor Committee, and one of the council's most prominent voices for the rights and safety of workers, and Vincent Alvarez, president of the New York City Central Labor Council, which is the nation's largest regional labor federation. Council member De La Rosa, Vincent Alvarez, welcome to CityWorks. I've got to start with you, Vincent, on the question of why New York is called the country's labor capital, and give you some props for that, I guess.
Well, thanks for being here. Firstly, Laura, it's always good to come in and talk to you about the state of workers here in the city. So we still represent, we have for many years, we represent 1 in 4 workers here in New York City. We have a really dynamic and thriving labor movement representing workers in the public sector, the private sector, and the construction trades. Last year, as you mentioned, we saw 70,000 of them out in the streets, beginning with the nurses in early January last year. And fighting for just basic protections in the workplace after dealing with a lot during the pandemic, dealing with the affordability crisis. And these workers, they come from organizations that have a history of doing this. And I think that they showed victories. They showed victories, they showed solidarity. Many workers from different industries showed solidarity with each other too. And I think that that's been a trademark of the New York City labor movement, representation in the workplace at a high number, showing solidarity with each other, continuing to use the moment and the challenges that workers have to go out there and to make gains for workers. And we're looking to do that here in 2024.
And the other part of it, of course, is the support of New Yorkers, both at the state and the city level, organized or not. Councilmember De La Rosa, you've got the opportunity to see that in your constituency. In New York in the City Council, but Washington Heights, but also before that in the State Assembly. What do you find out there? And have you noticed a change in enthusiasm when it comes to backing worker rights, even from people who aren't themselves unionized?
Absolutely. We are seeing that there is an excitement around our communities organizing. When workers organize, they also organize the broader community. In my district, for example, I can tell you that the Starbucks workers were out in force. And every parent that walked by a Starbucks worker when they were out in force was asking, what is happening here? It is not enough to just go get our coffee at these corporations, corporate locations, but also to understand what is happening to workers here. It was the nurses, as Vinny said, who set the tone for us. I have New York Presbyterian Hospital in my backyard, and it was egregious to see the nurses coming right out of a pandemic where we banged our pots and called them heroes and sheroes, asking for the bare minimum. And so we've seen that there is excitement growing. We also see that as legislators, there is an understanding that it's not only about lifting communities when we think about policy decisions, but also lifting workers, because when we lift workers, we are indeed lifting our communities, lifting wages, lifting benefits, lifting families as we go. And so there is an excitement, there is an enthusiasm, and I hope that enthusiasm endures.
Well, let's talk about what has caused it, because, I mean, the kind of organizing you're talking about, Carmen, if I may call you that, is what labor writer and organizer Jay McAlevey for years has called whole worker organizing, organizing the worker at home, the worker in their community, the worker at their school, at their church, bringing in the community. And that wasn't always the way that labor leaders organized their campaigns. So this change, particularly in the level of public receptivity, has actual concrete roots perhaps we can track. It's not just a change in the weather. You want to talk a little bit about that, Carmen, the changes that you've seen? And then Vinny, I'd love to hear the same from you.
Yeah, absolutely. I will tell you that when we saw our nation turn to a more conservative route, when we saw, Trump come in and pack the courts with anti-union judges, where we saw decisions start to come out, I think it was a real wake-up call for folks to understand that we must organize within our communities, that when we talk about, school crossing guards, something as simple as that, when we walk our children to school, are they safe? Those are union workers. Grocery stores in our community who are feeding us during the pandemic, those are folks that are critical to our communities. And so, we started to see these massive tax breaks for the wealthy. We started to see corporations who exist in our communities through franchises really take advantage of workers. And it's something we saw before, but it was so egregious coming out of a pandemic, where I think communities really felt that if the system was broken the way the pandemic showed us it was, then we can't put it back together in the normal course of work as we would before the pandemic. We have to build something different and something new. And the plight of workers is at the center of that, right? We can't be safe. We can't have adequate health care. We can't have adequate housing. We can't construct affordable housing if we don't have the well-being of workers at the center. And so I think really that was the shift that brought us here where we are today. We are seeing legislation coming forward. I chair the Civil Service and Labor Committee, as you mentioned, and we're seeing every day our colleagues are coming in, not just with pieces of legislation because unions have told us this is what we need to do, but because constituents have come into our office and said, I am a laborer, I am a nurse, I am a teacher, and this is how we need our city and our state legislators to act in accordance if we are going to have strong communities. And we feel good about what is happening here.
It reminds me of what we heard from Chicago during the teachers' strike years back, where you heard the entire communities organized even before COVID, or the teachers in Appalachia, in West Virginia, same thing, organizing. But it does seem as if COVID has made a real difference.
It has, and I think there's a tipping point in all of these struggles, and workers have reached a tipping point. That were 40 years of growing inequality, 40 years of corporate greed and attacks on workers in the workplace, and then all of a sudden, 4 years ago, we had COVID hit, and they were asked to do more. They were put in unsafe workplaces and conditions in order to address some of the issues that first responders and others, even beyond first responders, had to deal with. They were dealing with continuing rising inequality, the affordability crisis, and many of them, as their contracts were coming due, or workers who weren't represented, said, well, we got to turn towards collective action, and within that collective action, it's got to be broader than just people in our workplaces. It's got to be people that we live with, people that we work with, people in our communities, people in our houses of worship, and that's how we have to do this level of organizing. Organizing is really hard. It's really difficult, and there's two phases of organizing and ultimately getting to a point of a contract. You have the whole phase in the lead up to the election, and then even once you get recognized, there's a whole second campaign by anti-worker corporations and companies and law firms out there in order to prevent you from getting that first contract. So so there's a real need to have these broad, strong, diverse coalitions beyond just the workplace.
So well put. I hear what you're saying, that it's a hard enough job to get recognition of the union, and then to actually get the first contract is a whole nother fight. And presumably that's where it's with that contract that people see a real change in their lives. What's holding some of these contracts up? What sort of tactics are you seeing out there, Councilmember De La Rosa?
Well, we are just seeing, like, for example, I can talk about a little bit SAG-AFTRA and the Writers Guild. This summer, we were at the picket lines with those workers, and there are new technologies that are coming into industries that we have to learn how contracts have to reflect the protections that are needed as technology advances, as we see the people power being replaced with machines and technology. How are we adjusting our workforce to make sure that workers are protected. We saw it with telework in our civil service, right? After the pandemic, we realized there are jobs that can be taken offline or online. And so how do we secure contracts that reflect the changing dynamics for workers? Sometimes these conversations are new, they're nuanced. And so there are real holdups in the negotiation of contracts, but also we're seeing people coming to tables in bad faith. And that is something that as a city council, we've pushed back on. Our city, we have major contracts with major corporations in our city. And we've taken the position that we shouldn't be entering into contracts with corporations we already know are exploiting workers. Because when bad bosses come to the table in bad faith, they are not negotiating for the benefit and well-being of these workers. And so that always holds up a contract when we're seeing bosses coming to the table and they're not taking into consideration the holistic needs of their workforce.
What sort of tactics are you seeing?
Well, firstly, corporations are making and have been and continue to make a mockery of the whole National Labor Relations Act in the process. And they will hire the best minds money can buy to crush these workers in their attempt to have a collective voice in the workplace that ultimately is going to lead to representation. We see in 1/3 of cases, we see illegal acts of retribution, revenge, retaliation, firings. ULPs are having to be filed by many of these unions in order to protect these workers. Yep, in order to protect these workers. And that's just first, as I said, to get to representation, and then we can see continuing in the first contract process as well. So I mean, I give these workers enormous credit. It is an uphill climb. Yeah. Because they're coming at them with everything they have, and the statistics unfortunately bear that out.
But we have one of the most labor-friendly National Labor Relations Boards that we've had in decades under the Biden-Harris administration. They may have their flaws, but they have a very good NLRB leader.
They do, and elections matter. And as I tell folks, you know, if you look at the support that they have in various ways, in organizing campaigns now, they have somebody who has their backs. And I think corporations know that as well, too. And so it's important. And look, and that's why we've seen this wave of workers, number one, worker solidarity, and we talked about the strikes last year. But we also, we don't even capture how many workers, in addition to the 70,000 workers that are out on strike, who used that solidarity and collective action in order to secure better contracts, because they never went on strike, but they were able to come together and they showed that solidarity. And then we're also seeing that in some ways to having success in representing workers in new industries, digital media. We've seen terrific organizing here in New York City in digital media, United Auto Workers, and in education and other industries out there, retail workers that are out there, you know, and in addition to Starbucks, you know, REI and others stores that we've seen. Good, real organizing which is taking place. So you know, workers, it is real. And that's what, and I think that, as I said earlier, inequality, affordability crisis, workers pushing back after the pandemic, and you see the support for workers at historical highs, certainly from my lifetime. Particularly with younger workers, it's even higher, but over 70% with the general population, in the mid-80s for workers under the age of 35. So these are, so the question you have to ask is, well, why isn't there more organizing taking place? And I think you have to look at the real aggressively anti-worker tactics, which are being, which corporations are taking out.
All right, well, we'll talk more about that after the break. Clearly, new organizing needing to happen, new issues coming up in contracting, new tactics coming from those who don't want to see unions. What difference can legislation make? What difference can government make? And I want to talk to the council member about what difference unions made in her life. We'll take a short break and be right back. You're watching CityWorks. Welcome back to CityWorks. We're talking about workers and the organized labor movement here in New York City with Council Member Carmen De La Rosa and New York City Central Labor Council President Vincent Alvarez. Coming to you, Carmen, before the break, we were talking about the challenges that are faced as people get to having union recognition and then trying to get to that first contract. And, it can be a long time before people actually feel the difference that a union makes in their lives. You've had that. You know that feeling. You can talk about it. What difference does a union make in your life?
Yeah, absolutely. So I immigrated to this country as a child from the Dominican Republic, and my mother and my father obviously immigrated with me. When we landed in Washington Heights, it was about finding opportunity for education, for progress for our families. We were the first wave of immigrants from our immediate family, and my mother became a home health aide, and she was affiliated at that time with DC 37. And it was her that she became the breadwinner in our family. My father fell ill shortly after he came to this country, and my mother had to pick us up literally by the bootstraps and say, I'm going to be the breadwinner here. And it was because of the stability of her job. It was because she was able to find flexibility to literally work 2 shifts in order to be able to be home, take care of us, then go to the next shift once we were settled and in bed. That allowed for us to progress here in this country. Later on, my mother ended up bringing her sisters here. They became factory workers, right? And we saw the difference between my mother's stable job and those sisters who came here to work in factories. It made a world of a difference for my family. It's made a world of a difference for immigrants in this country. We were talking earlier about construction, and we know that for many of us, construction has been a path. But we've seen a lot of exploitation. We've seen a lot of death in that industry. It continues to be one of the most dangerous industries in our city. Now that I'm a council member, it's kind of like my life has come full circle. I represent the community where I was raised, but at the same time, I'm tasked as the chair of this committee to ensure that those industries that have exploited the immigrant workforce, that have exploited workers in the past, are held accountable, and that the union is at the heart of making sure that those protections are in place. And so I believe in union. I believe in the power that unions bring to stabilizing families that would otherwise not have the stability that they need in order to raise large families in our city. And our city gets more and more expensive, and that wealth gap continues to widen. We are seeing that unions are making the difference in terms of New Yorkers being able to stay in New York and being able to live here as a city.
And coming to you, Vinny, your union story?
Well, when my dad came here, it's a family story, and quite often the immigrant story is tied very closely to the union story. My dad came from Cuba many years ago. My grandparents worked with Local 6, with Unite here in the city. My grandfather, my other grandfather on my mom's side came from Ireland and worked for TW Local 100. He was a motorman on the BMT line. Right until when he retired in 1955. And my mom was a DC 37 member too. She was a librarian, and my dad helped organize bowling alleys, did work with organizing bowling alleys with SEIU, which was not necessarily a safe job in the 1950s for young Latino workers. So, but I think, here we are, first generation Americans, and because of the representation I would say that they had when they came here as younger immigrants, working in a workplace where they had benefits, where they had safe workplaces, where they had a chance to really enter into the middle class, they were able to put my family, my brothers and sisters, and all of us into a middle class lifestyle from Brooklyn and then raise us in Staten Island.
And look at the other side of it is you two are immigrants now embodying the, power in the labor movement. Right. I mean, I think there's a story in the New York Times as we're recording this about how immigrants are actually reinvigorating the economies of many states, Maine, Colorado, you name it, bringing not just work and muscle workers, but people with an interest in union organizing and sometimes some experience with it. One of the questions I have for you, Carmen, and Vinny too, is what difference does government make? I mean, at the local level, you've been involved in New York with the Construction Justice Act, which is directly addressing the issues that you raised. Obviously, you can't get bills introduced, let alone voted for alone. The context matters. What is the status of that bill, but also what is what difference does the government context make? And I'm thinking, we're in an election year. How could the C's change?
Absolutely. As a city council member, as a local representative, one of the most important tools we have is land use. the tools to make sure that we are building and preserving and constructing a city that reflects the needs of our constituents. And construction in our city, as I spoke earlier, continues to be one of the most dangerous industries. We've seen rampant exploitation. But when unions come in and they are working in our communities, we also need to make sure that the tools are in place to make sure that the wage standards for those workers who are literally, quite literally building our skyline and building our communities up are at par. And so working with the laborers, I've introduced the Construction Worker Justice Act. And this is a bill that is basically going to be setting a wage standard as well as a community hire component for projects that are done with city subsidies. So if construction project is being funded by the city of New York, we should ensure that that project comes with it a living and sustainable wage for workers, that there are safety precautions being taken at these construction sites, and that there is a local hire component so that those same workers who are building up our skyline can afford to live here. So I've met workers who are in homeless shelters right now, and that is egregious to us.
Now, we stay studiously nonpartisan here, of course, but it is true that when it comes to construction, there's probably no other presidential candidate or past president who's been more involved in construction than Donald Trump. What fears do you have, Carmen, especially for your colleagues in the construction industry, and what do you hear of their fears were a Trump presidency to come back?
Yeah, absolutely. As I mentioned, these workers are really workers that have experienced exploitation throughout their careers. And we are now at a point where we're seeing the death of workers be something that is becoming commonplace. The fear is that, large corporations that are given these incentives to construct and build across the nation will do so without taking into account the protections that are needed at construction sites to ensure that, one, we are building with labor, that we are ensuring that there are safety standards that are met. And there are real fears about what that could mean, especially in our city, as we welcome asylum seekers into our communities, folks who are looking for the opportunity to actually have gainful employment, that they don't understand the language. Language is a barrier. And so there are fears of what that could mean for an industry that is already prone to exploitation, prone to death on construction sites, and prone to leaving people once a death occurs with their hands completely empty. We've heard the stories of family members of construction workers who have died on construction sites. And if they're non-union, they don't have the support of rebuilding their lives once that breadwinner has died at a site. And so there are real fears, and this is something that I know that our partners in labor are thinking of in this time.
Well, anything you want to weigh in on that, Vinny? I'm sure you have a view. I don't know what the record is of the Trump construction sites, but I'm sure it's not entirely pretty. But I do want to come back to the brass tacks that we began with, which is, yay, it's fantastic. New York has greater union density than anywhere else. But it's still not very dense, and it's still not very dense, especially in the private sector. And what are you going to do about that?
Well, I will come back. I will address that in 1 second. But the issue with Trump, I have to say, it's like we do not want to see any backsliding taking place. And we've seen this administration, whether it be with legislation or with some of the appointments that he has made too at the Department of Labor. We spoke earlier about the National Labor Relations Act, which are really, really pro-worker appointments and pro-worker policies, which we're going to be feeling for decades to come. So we want to make sure that we do everything that we can to ensure that President Biden is reelected, and that'll continue those support for
and
workers.
To get more people to join unions?
And to get more people to join unions. He's been on the picket line. We know his support. We saw him out there with the UAW when they were out on strike. We know his support for unions, and that is needed because we do have to make sure that we're addressing this issue of power in the workplace, which means we have to get more people in unions. And we have to make sure that we begin to raise the density that we see, not just here in New York, but elsewhere in this country.
And the private sector numbers in this city? We
have a culture here in government which supports unionization's efforts, and it's higher here like it is higher throughout the country. The private sector, particularly, as I said, when we had this mindset and this culture in 40 years in this country, and it's been supported, unfortunately, by anti-worker legislators and people in government.
Let me give Carmen the last word. Final thoughts from you, Carmen. What can people do?
Get involved. Find out if your colleagues if you're in a private sector, if your colleagues are being exploited, if there are scheduling issues. Talk to our union partners who are out on picket lines every single day. Show up for another union who might be at this moment in a picket. I'm going today with the Fordham workers, the graduate workers at Fordham. I'll be there at 11:30 this morning to support them. And so what we need is collective solidarity and collective action to ensure that we continue to increase the numbers here in our city and across the nation.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Carmen De La Rosa and Vincent Alvarez. Wonderful speaking with you. That's it for CityWorks this time. If you have comments or questions, write to us at cityworks@slu.cuny.edu. For CityWorks, I'm Laura Flanders. Thanks for watching.